Hare Krishna Prabhus. Thank you for welcoming me back to your Russian Sangha. Now, last time I presented the first class of a new series called Our Srila Prabhupada, Lessons from His Lilas. When the Lord and His pure devotees descend to the material world, everything they do is lila, a pastime performed for pure pleasure. At the same time, out of compassion for us, they embed lessons in those lilas to help us recover our identity as their eternal loving servants. Now, 2 weeks ago, I spoke about Prabhupada's pastimes during the weekend he initiated me in July 1971. By the summer of 1972, the Hare Krishna movement was 6 years old. Most Americans had seen us chanting Hare Krishna on the street corners of their cities, but because we looked and sounded different than them, they did not understand us. So Prabhupada suggested we invite America's main influencers, politicians, scholars, and journalists to New Vrindavan, the first ISKCON farm, for what His Divine Grace called Bhagavat Dharma discourses, talks on the deep universal meaning of Krishna consciousness. His discourses, delivered on a picturesque hilltop overlooking the farm, would frame the biggest Hare Krishna celebrations of the year, Janmastami and Vyasapuja, the back-to-back appearance anniversaries of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Srila Prabhupada, Krishna's greatest ambassador for the modern era. So one day near the end of August, I arrived in New Vrindavan at twilight. Too late to hear Prabhupada's discourse, but in time to behold him sailing downhill on a palanquin surrounded by a sea of chanting and dancing devotees. I bowed down in the dust, now pink in the setting sun, and thrilled to the thunderous kirtan filling the sky. I sensed an historic event unfolding with repercussions beyond America, nay, beyond earth and sky itself. From their swan ships, surely the celestials must be following Prabhupada as he gripped the palanquin's ropes and chanted Hare Krishna down the winding, dusty path. Lesson 1. Wherever Srila Prabhupada went, despite his fairly short height, he always looked larger than life. Why? Because we were seeing him through our ears, through the momentous words he spoke as God's representative. Simply by attentively hearing recordings of Prabhupada today, anyone can have that same experience. It is that simple. Seeing Prabhupada through purified ears. The following evening, as Prabhupada was finishing his discourse, from the back of the pavilion, a long-haired reporter shouted a challenge. If the purpose of life is to know Krishna, then why is Maya so strong? Without hesitation, Prabhupada roared back in response, your purpose is not strong. The gale of his words swept us back like wheat in the wind. Devotees and guests alike sat stunned, each left to ponder the implications of Prabhupada's words. His rhetorical flourish was so sudden, swift, and final that then and there the discourse ended. There were no more questions. Lesson 2. As Krishna's empowered representative, Prabhupada was never intimidated by journalists' questions. This time, since the journalist had challenged Prabhupada, Prabhupada challenged him back. Your purpose is not strong. Following Srila Prabhupada, we should always be prepared to share Krishna consciousness with others in a way just suitable to the occasion. During the Janmastami and Vyasapuja days that followed, Prabhupada took a break from the discourses to celebrate the festivals with his followers. After fasting all day for Janmashtami, we followed Srila Prabhupada into the temple to sing the Lord's glories and hear his pastimes of appearing on earth at midnight in a prison during a thunderstorm. During the midnight arati, I was crouching by Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana. Looking at Prabhupada, look at the deities, Sri Sri, Radha, Vrindavan Chandra. Sometimes Prabhupada would close his eyes while singing with kartals. At one point, he stopped singing and playing, so I thought he was falling asleep. Then I noticed his body wasn't slack, it was rigid. I realized he was communing deeply with the deities, and I felt ashamed. I was projecting my fatigue onto his trance. After the arati, everyone was more than ready to break the all-day fast. But Srila Prabhupada had the devotees open up Krishna book because he wanted to hear about the Lord's glorious midnight appearance. Prabhupada sat up straight, his eyes wide open, all ready to hear, just as we were all ready to eat. He had the visiting sannyasis pass around the Krishna book to take turns reading. 12:30 a.m. turned to 12:45, then 1 a.m., and gradually everyone started falling asleep, including the sannyasis, whose dandas rose or kept rising and falling to the temple room floor. Meanwhile, Prabhupada was listening with rapt attention, his transcendental senses increasingly enlivened, hearing the details of Krishna's mystical advent. At last, everyone was asleep except Prabhupada and the reader. As my godsister Vrindavaneshwari later recounted, a big smile came over Prabhupada's face as he said, So now Krishna is sitting on the lap of Mother Jashoda. I think you are all tired. So we can stop here. Lesson 3. Like the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada conquered over eating and sleeping by living the higher taste of non-stop loving service to Krishna. How else could he keep circling the globe and instantly adapt to whatever time it was when he landed? Although we can't imitate his divine grace, at least we can regulate our eating and sleeping to maximize our devotional service. As the Gita says in chapter 6, text 17, he who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, working, and recreation can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. And although regulation is necessary for us to advance in Krishna consciousness, we should never project our limitations, not to mention our faults, onto a liberated soul like Srila Prabhupada, as I had mistakenly done that just Janmastami evening in New Vrindavan. The following day was Srila Prabhupada's Vyasapuja celebration. As the sun climbed to high noon, all the devotees and guests, now numbering nearly 1,000, sat inside the hilltop pavilion with Sri Sri Radha Damodar and the Jagannath deities presiding on stage. Everything was draped in scarlet against the summer greenery outside. The legendary singer-preacher Vishnu Jan Swami was leading an entrancing kirtan. Then Srila Prabhupada arrived, and the kirtan soared to greater heights. From the makeshift Vyasasan, Prabhupada played strong kartals, his voice responding vigorously to Vishnu Jan's lead, now moving toward a crescendo of Hare Krishna. Suddenly, Prabhupada stole the lead from Vishnu Jan, and we went absolutely mad, arms outstretched, singing and weeping. We rushed the stage, where the sky above Prabhupada and the deities seemed to open, flooding the entire assembly with pure love of God. When finally Prabhupada brought the kirtan to a close by intoning the Prema Dvani prayers, we dropped to the grass, swooning with joy. Lesson 4. Like Lord Chaitanya, Srila Prabhupada is such a magnanimous personality. He is not content with his own trance of devotion. He wants to share it with everyone. Quote, not considering who asked for it and who did not, nor who was fit and who unfit to receive it, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu distributed the fruit of devotional service. That's CC Adi 9.29. That fruit is pure Krishna Prema, and unqualified as we were, Prabhupada and Gauranga Mahaprabhu were giving us a, quote, free sample. We had no idea what had hit us. But the best of Prabhupada's mercy was yet to come, especially for our esteemed guests. Sitting erect on the Vyasasan, Prabhupada was the saffron whorl of a scarlet lotus, the cynosure of hungry eyes and expectant ears. Beyond time, yet ever sensitive to the time, place, and circumstances of his audience. His divine grace cleared his throat, leaned into the microphone, and spoke, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, this ceremony," of course, those who are my students, they know what is this ceremony. Those who are visitors, for their information, I may inform you something about this ceremony. Otherwise, it may be misunderstood. An outsider may see that why a person is being worshipped like God. Well aware of American antipathy to authority, Prabhupada knew he had to demystify the parampara to make himself, as its representative, real to the audience. To do this, he made a comparison to that venerable American pedestrian, the mailman. Quote, "Just like a post peon comes and delivers you, say, $100. So he is not delivering that $100. Your friend has sent you $100. And his business is to hand over that $100 as it is, without any change, without taking $1 from it, no, or adding. His honesty, his perfection is that he delivers you that $100 which is sent by your friend. He may be imperfect in so many other ways, but when he does his business perfectly, he is perfect. Similarly, this Vyasapuja means we receive perfect knowledge from Krishna through the agency of spiritual master. Unquote. From the spiritual master as, quote, post peon, Prabhupada extends the comparison further to a child, and finally to America's, quote, best friend, the dog. Quote. So the spiritual master is very confidential servant, dog of God. If you can please the spiritual master, then God is pleased. This is the position of a spiritual master. Don't misunderstand that this person is sitting very comfortably and taking all honors and contribution. It is needed just to teach them how to respect the representative of God. This is the sum and substance of Vyasapuja. Thank you very much. Unquote. Lesson 5. Like Srila Prabhupada, we should always try to make the truth and beauty of Krishna consciousness accessible to people, especially people of influence who can influence so many others, either toward Krishna or away from him. In the Bhagavad Gita 1869, Krishna himself describes such a compassionate devotee. Quote, "There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear." And now it's time for the translator to remind everyone to send their questions. After Srila Prabhupada's Vyasapuja address, the devotees cheered and the guests smiled as Prabhupada stepped off the Vyasasana and offered full dandavats to the deities. Accompanied by a roaring kirtan, he stepped into a small yellow Volkswagen, which carried him down the hillside and off to his quarters, where he would chat with his servant awaiting a piece of his Vyasapuja cake. Back at the pavilion, Prabhupada's cake still sat at the lotus feet of the deities. Spanning the width of the stage, the cake was gigantic, so enormous, so layered, and so ornate. It had taken several ladies many days to bake. Now that Prabhupada had left, we turned our famished, fasting attention to the cake and dove in. I swiped a large piece, tucked it under my right arm, and ran like a football player through a gauntlet of fellow brahmacharis. I made it out of the pavilion, but not far down the hill, I was tackled and came out on the bottom of a 4-man pile. The cake was powder. The ants won. Across the hillside, similar dramas were playing out. If the cameramen were still shooting, they must have been having fun, recording this wild, anomalous postscript to Prabhupada's message for the evening news. The huge cake was now history. The devotee's behavior may have been incomprehensible to the public that day, but not to his divine grace. When his servant told him the devotees had eaten every last crumb of his cake, Prabhupada smiled and shook his head. That's all right. Bake another one. As I finish today's lilas and lessons, dear devotees, I am happy to report that many of us first generation Prabhupada followers have moved on from living to eat to eating to live and dying to live by his mercy. Quote, he lives forever by his divine instructions and the follower lives with him, unquote. For all generations of Srila Prabhupada's followers, may we live those sacred words as our daily Vyasapuja. I will now be more than happy to receive your questions and comments, Prabhus. Hare Krishna. What is that word? Auspicious chastisement? Auspicious. Good. Yeah. Have I ever witnessed? I think we had a question like this before. And although I've heard many stories about Prabhupada's anger, I'm just searching my memory now to think if I ever actually witnessed it. Not real intense anger. I told, well, let's see. The next Leela and lesson I'm going to do, I will tell about how Prabhupada, he chastised me just with a glance. So maybe I'll save that one for next time. But in the meantime, I did tell this already but I'll tell it again because maybe there's different people on the Sangha. And am I speaking too fast now for Lavanga? Okay. So I told how in 1974, this is also coming up. What to do? This is a big one too. Like today is Janmastami and Vyasapuja, and the next time is it's going to be called deity installation, and then the time after that was going to be called Ratha Yatra. And at this Ratha Yatra in Chicago in 1974, I witnessed Prabhupada's chastisement, but it wasn't really fury; it was just a correction. So I really want to save that too. So maybe we should save it. Okay, sure. Again, I've seen in movies, but personally, no. Personally, I was never present. I've just seen in these amazing films of Prabhupada dancing, especially in London, Ratha Yatra is the most famous, and also San Francisco Ratha Yatra. Ratha Yatra always brought out a special ecstasy for Prabhupada because Prabhupada was performing Ratha Yatra, as you know, if you've read his Lilamrita, his biography, since the age of 5, Prabhupada was doing Ratha Yatra. So to see people all over the world dancing in Ratha Yatra from his personal preaching was like the perfection of life. In fact, I will tell you one thing, even though I didn't see it, just last Sunday here in ISKCON Tucson, Arizona, I showed the latest Memories DVD from Siddhanta Prabhu's Memories interviews. And there was one memory from an American sannyasi, you may know him, Keshava Bharati Maharaj. He's a dear friend of Vaisheshika Prabhu, who I think has been to Russia. Yeah. So Keshava Bharati Maharaj told how at the 1974 Ratha Yatra, there's a famous photograph of Prabhupada on the cart, and his hands are upraised, and he's dancing in Ratha Yatra, and these leaders are with him on the cart also, and they're also going wild seeing Prabhupada dancing. But what Keshava Bharati Maharaj witnessed is what happened when Prabhupada was on the cart, and before he started dancing, he just took his arms and he raised his arms above his head. And when he did that, not only the devotees, but the thousands and thousands of people who were in Golden Gate Park, they also raised their hands. I mean, these are people who were just walking by in the park, many of them. They were just ordinary people. But when they saw the cart, then they looked at the cart, and then they were fascinated by this elderly gentleman, this Swami on the cart, and they just followed along and watched. But then when Prabhupada raised his arms, he had such potency, just like when Prabhupada, like I told you, when Prabhupada stole the lead from Vishnu Jan Swami at that Vyasapuja, we were just swept up in this tidal wave of Krishna Prem. We just swept along like a tidal wave. So when these people saw Prabhupada raise his arms, and they spontaneously raised, thousands of people raised their arms. There's pictures of this too. Thousands of arms went up in the air. So when Keshava Bharati and Vaisheshika Prabhu, his dear friend, they were at a book table at some distance from this. When they saw that, they were struck with wonder. Wow, look at the potency of Prabhupada. He just raises his arms, and everybody in the park raises their arms. That's Krishna Shakti. That's unbelievable, empowered devotee. So, but we'll save the Rath Yatra story for later too. The one eyewitness. Okay, go ahead. Well, that was 48 years ago. All I remember was, well, of course, I didn't even taste it because I just grabbed, I say, swiped. I went for a corner of the cake because at the corner of the cake, that's where a lot of icing was bunched up on the bottom corner. So I saw that. So I wanted a lot of icing with my piece. And I was pretty close to the cake. I was pretty close to where Prabhupada had been sitting on his Vyasasana. So I ran right for that. I leaped up on the stage and I just grabbed and I just started running. And people saw me get that big, creamy icing laden piece. So they started running out. They wanted that too. So I don't know because I never tasted it. And that was Krishna's trick. We were all so greedy for the cake. We were eating Prabhupada's cake before him. So everybody just was stealing and getting caught and getting tackled. And the ants had the feast. They feasted on the cake. Now, the story of Prabhupada saying later came from his servant. His name was Nandu Kumar. And Nandu Kumar Prabhu told us later what had happened, that Prabhupada had said to him, so there is some cake. And Nandu Kumar said, oh, yes, Prabhupada, I will go back to the pavilion. It was about a 2-mile drive. So we had to get back in the yellow Volkswagen and to drive all the way back down the road, then all the way back up the mountain. And by then it was all over. It was like a half hour later. And everybody was gone. And there wasn't one crumb or smudge or piece of that cake. It had all been devoured, by maybe people and ants. And so that's when then he thought, uh-oh, there's no cake left. So Nandu Kumar got in the Volkswagen, drove back down, got to the farm, ran in. Srila Prabhupada, the devotees ate your cake. So that's why I said in the talk, maybe those. I mean, the New York Times was even there. I mean, these were big journalists were there for this event. They wanted to meet the leader of who was responsible for all this singing and dancing on street corners. They wanted to meet the head of the Hare Krishna movement. So maybe they couldn't understand what was going on when after the elderly dignified Swami left, and then his followers go insane over this cake. They were probably writing it down for the Times or the evening news for the nearest news station was WWVA, Wheeling, West Virginia, evening news. So they probably didn't know what to make of it. But Prabhupada knew us. He knew we were sincere. He knew we were wild. He knew we were out of control. We were just trying to follow the regulative principles. We were struggling with that. So he just had that very sweet response. That's all right. You make another one. And so quickly, what happened? I heard later, some Madhajis, I think Nandu Kumar went to some Madhaji and said, oh, Prabhupada didn't get any cake. So she quickly did something. She made him a cake. And then later on, it took a little time because she had to bake it. Then he brought it and he had some cake, but that was much later. But he's so patient and tolerant because he just appreciated how we were helping him, but he knew we were kind of a bit like monkeys, so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did I tell the story before of the lady who waited 17 years before she took initiation? Oh, okay. So this is a story. I'm going to tell you a story now. We do have time. I'll tell you the full story of a colleague of mine in ISKCON education who had a similar feeling to, I take it that the questioner has met somebody who doesn't want to take initiation because the person already feels that Prabhupada's my spiritual master, right? Okay. Okay. So in 1987, a Western educated Indian lady, she read Prabhupada's Gita as it is, was completely thrilled to read Prabhupada's Gita, recognized, because she's from India, she knew Gita, but she recognized this is the real Gita. This is Gita as it, this is the absolute truth. Was completely thrilled, but then was completely horrified because then she wanted to meet, Prabhupada. But then she heard that Prabhupada had left this world 10 years earlier in 1977, because it was 87 now. So, but she was still very inspired by Prabhupada's Gita. So she heard there was a whole movement that had built up around this Gita. So she visited the temple in Calcutta. And she was teaching at the time. She was a teacher in the outside world. And she kept teaching, but then she was also visiting the temple and doing service and reading Prabhupada's Gita, and then reading other books. By then, so many books Prabhupada had translated. That was in 1987. And then in 1990, a godbrother of mine, and I'm not going to say any names because the lady said to me, yes, you can use my story. She's my friend. She said, you can use my story, but don't mention my name because I don't want people coming up to me and saying, oh, you're the person in the story. And, I don't want to be famous for something. So anyway, so it's going to be all very kind of anonymous. So, so a godbrother of mine went to India in 1990, as we do from time to time. We go to India on pilgrimage, and he met this lady, and he met this lady and started developing a relationship with her. He was American, direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada. She was Indian, and she was uninitiated, but she was, I think she was an English teacher. So perfect English. And then they started a relationship. And then in 1991, they marry with the consent of her parents, because she's from a good family from Kanpur. And then they moved to America, where my godbrother lives, in a nice community, still there. They still have a place there. And okay, so this is 1991. So she's been reading Prabhupada's books now for 4 years. 87, she read the Gita, and now she's reading his books like Nectar of Devotion. And in Nectar of Devotion, it says, especially Nectar of Devotion, it says that one must take initiation from a spiritual master. So Prabhupada is telling her in Nectar of Devotion that she has to be initiated. So she figures it's time for me to get serious about this. So she's been reading the books of another ISKCON leader, and she likes the books of the leader. And so she writes the leader and says, I really like your books. And they really inspire me because a lot of them are about Srila Prabhupada. I'm writing you now would you consider exploring a relationship with me that I could someday become your disciple, your Diksha disciple? So the leader writes back and says, well, I'm not so much initiating anymore. My health is not good. And, you're already married to a Prabhupada disciple. And it's good you like my books, but it's good if you read Prabhupada's books. And you're married to a Prabhupada disciple, and the husband is like a guru for you. So why don't you just read Prabhupada's books and be happy with your pati guru, your husband guru? So the lady is rather disappointed because Prabhupada's telling her in Nectar Devotion she has to go to the next step, the next stage, and take initiation. But she really respects the leader, and she decides to follow his instructions. Now, meanwhile, what's happening is, even from the first time she read Prabhupada's Gita, it was the 1980s. And if you know anything about ISKCON history, after Prabhupada left, there was a lot of chaos, and there was a lot of disturbance, and there was a lot of offenses committed to Srila Prabhupada. I mean, a lot, don't get me wrong, it wasn't just all bad, but there was a lot of disturbance going on. So there was a lot of imitation of Prabhupada's position amongst people who were initiating. And there was a severe reaction to that. So there was a lot of fall downs, there was even violence. And so ISKCON in the 1980s, it was like really tough. And even into the 90s. But the heart of the darkness was the 80s, but even into the 90s. So by the time this lady had married this American godbrother of mine, things were still going on in ISKCON, and they would through the 90s. So anyway, she's reading Prabhupada's books. This leader she respects has told her just to read Prabhupada's books and cooperate with her husband and be happy. And in the meantime, she's also observing what's going on in ISKCON, that there's still a lot of chaos going on. So she starts to think within herself, I think for now, Prabhupada's telling me to take initiation, but maybe I'll have to wait on that, because right now, I don't really trust what's going on in ISKCON. And what if I get initiated and I also get very disappointed and traumatized and hurt, like so many people I've heard about. So I'm just going to stick with Prabhupada for now. So she does that. And the 90s go on, and there's still a lot of dramas and traumas and things happening in ISKCON, but it's starting to clear too. And by 1994, the GBC passes their first founder Acharya resolution, which officially declares Prabhupada everyone's foundational Shiksha Guru. So that's nice. And there would be others to follow, but still there's traumas and dramas still happening. Okay, the 90s go on. And 1996 was a big year because that was Prabhupada's centennial year. It was the 100th anniversary of Prabhupada's appearance in this world. And it was a real landmark year because there was a lot of healing going on, and a lot of devotees who had left the movement, some of them were inspired to, come a little closer back. And but still there was stuff. It was a good year. It was a turning point in so many ways. Now, as the end of the 90s happened, there was something in the world, I don't know how old some of you are, but there was something in the world called Y2K. Now, Y2K was this thing where it had to do with computers, that the computers had been all originally designed and built only to calculate things up to 1999. So there was a lot of speculation amongst computer people that once the new millennium came in, that the whole world, which is now computerized, all the banks, and the communication systems, they would all fail. And we'd have the whole world as we know it, go up in a puff of cyber smoke. It would be the end of civilization as we knew it. And a lot of devotees even took it very seriously, and they were stocking food, and it's going to be the end of the world. And anyway, long story short, here we are, it's 2020, the world didn't end. And I guess computer people figured out how to carry on after the new millennium. So Y2K passed, and even at the place where this lady was living, and I was living there too, in this community, and the world didn't end. So we all breathed a sigh of relief. And then it's time to turn our attention back to more, pressing business here. It's a new millennium, it's a new day. Let's take a fresh look at our preaching. And so this lady also starts taking a fresh look at her situation. Here it is, 13 years after she's read Prabhupada's Gita as it is, and after she's been hearing Prabhupada tell her that you've got to take the next step, you've got to take initiation. And it's becoming a super conflict within her. Because on the one hand, she doesn't trust on the ground, as we say in English, on the ground what's going on in ISKCON. But on the other hand, Prabhupada is insisting that even there's one place in Nectar Devotion where Prabhupada says, unless one takes initiation, the actual connection with Krishna consciousness is never achieved. Now that, of course, it doesn't mean that all the service we do before Diksha doesn't count for anything. But it is a reminder that we have to keep going on the path. We should not prematurely rush into initiation, nor should we avoid it. It's a natural thing that we develop a relationship with a bona fide spiritual master. So anyway, after the new millennium comes, she starts revealing to her husband how internally this is becoming an incompatible situation. She's so torn inside her. She can't imagine offering boga or incense or flowers to anybody's picture but Srila Prabhupada. I mean, because she knows that Prabhupada is her spiritual master. From the shiksha, from following his instructions, from reading his books, and she's a teacher. She's a bright lady. She knows the books. She's a good teacher. She's a good preacher, but she has this conflict, this dilemma, this internal dilemma. So she starts. It starts affecting her marriage now, because she's telling her Prabhu that, Prabhu, I can't go on like this. So in 2003, she and her husband are at a festival at an anonymous place. And anyway, it's an ISKCON festival. And she hears a leader giving a talk at the festival. And she's very inspired by the talk. And so she says to her husband, Prabhu, we have to meet with this leader. He's inspiring me. And I have to resolve this dilemma. I'm losing my mind. It's driving me crazy. So her husband is very understanding, and he approaches the manager of the festival and said, Prabhu, my wife and I, we need a meeting with Maharaj. That much I'll tell you. He was a Maharaj. So it's very important. It's very urgent. So the manager says, well, Maharaj has been traveling all over the world, and he's so tired, and he's not feeling well. But if it's really, really, really urgent, like you say, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 10 minutes. 10 minutes with the Maharaj to solve your problem. Okay, so the meeting happens in a nice private setting with the husband and the wife and the Maharaj. And so by Krishna's mercy, 10 minutes turns into 20 minutes, turns into 30 minutes, turns into 40 minutes. And in 40 minutes, Krishna, in the heart of everyone, lets this very sincere Vaishnavi pour out her heart to the Maharaj, give the whole history of how she came to Krishna consciousness, and reveals how she's been thinking, that she's so inspired by her spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, from reading his books for all these years. But she can't imagine taking initiation from anybody else, because look what's been going on in ISKCON. And it's been getting better by 2003 now. It's been improving, but still, she doesn't want to risk anybody coming in between her and Srila Prabhupada. So then she says, Maharaj, am I being offensive? And then the Maharaj says very kind and wise words. He says, no, you're not being offensive. You're being intelligent. And then he tells her how long it took him to surrender to Srila Prabhupada. His journey, his odyssey. And that was very nice that he opened himself up to her and her husband about how long it took him. And then at the end of his story, he said magic words. He said the words, these words. Now, Mataji, what if you took initiation from someone who wouldn't block your relationship with Srila Prabhupada, who wouldn't come in between you and Srila Prabhupada, but would enrich, enhance, and deepen your relationship, your core foundational relationship with Srila Prabhupada? And so the lady says, oh, I never heard that before. No wonder she was suffering. She never heard that. That's the job, that's the duty, that's the dharma of the initiating of the Diksha and Shiksha gurus post-founder Acharya, to enrich, enhance, and deepen their disciples' relationship with the founder Acharya. I never heard that before. So she's inspired. So the festival ends. They go back home, and Maharaj goes about his travels. But she starts corresponding with him. And they develop a relationship. And then a year later, in 2004, lo and behold, she takes Diksha from Maharaj. Now, I knew that story vaguely. But when I started researching my founder Acharya seminars 7 years later in 2011, when I was living in Hawaii, I knew her story, but I wanted it because I'm a friend of hers, but I never heard all the details. So I said, Mataji, could you email me the details, the whole story? And so she did just what I just told you. She emailed me the story. And then at the end of the story, this is 7 years later now, it's 2011, she said this to me in the email. She said, and now, 7 years later, Sureshvara Prabhu, because Maharaj, he's done exactly what he said a bona fide spiritual master should do. He's deepened, enriched, and enhanced my core relationship with Srila Prabhupada. And now, 7 years later, because he is who he is, Maharaj has taken his place in my heart at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. And I said, yes, that's how the parampara works, post-founder Acharya, after the founder Acharya leaves. This is the real thing. So if that story has helped the questioner, I would like the questioner to be able to say to the person the questioner knows that, again, as I said, initiation should not be avoided. It's a necessary step on the Bhakti Marg per Rupa Goswami's 9 steps, beginning with Shraddha to Prem. But it's not to be rushed into. It's to be developed naturally. And the proof, the test, because you're supposed to, when you meet somebody who you feel this could be a potential guru-disciple relationship, the disciple is supposed to examine the guru. And in our case, it means, is this person enriching, enhancing, and deepening my relationship with Srila Prabhupada? And is this person following Prabhupada's instructions? Right? And then the guru is also examining the prospective disciple. The guru should be thinking, is this person a real, sincere candidate for initiation? Could this person be my disciple? Could I work with this person? And if after a year there's a mutual examination, and if that's going on, and if there's some what I call spiritual chemistry, if the potential disciple really is inspired that, yes, I could be a disciple of this person. And if the guru is really inspired that this person is a real legitimate disciple, then the ceremony should just formalize what has already taken place in the heart. As Prabhupada himself said when he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he said, so I accepted him as my spiritual master immediately, not officially, but in my heart. It took 11 years for Prabhupada to actually make it official, 11 years later in Allahabad. So in the past, in ISKCON, it was often too quick, it was too cheap. The gurus weren't necessarily mature, and the disciples were not necessarily mature. And now we've learned hard lessons. So just because of what happened in the past should not block people from going forward, because now we see there's so many wonderful representatives of Srila Prabhupada in parampara. I mean, if I were a new person today, I would have no problem taking initiation from certain Vaishnavis I know and certain Vaishnavas I know who really inspire me because they really bring me closer to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Thank you for the question.